So I give you all until 5:15. You're supposed to have looked at the questions, which based on yesterday's class, I'm guessing like maybe half look at it, I guess, which is fine. So just go to page 2 and then analyze the 3 questions. Okay, if you happen to have done it already, then please go ahead and read the analysis. I don't think you have time to read the essay, so read the analysis first and then I'm going to take you through everything. Okay? You have time to read the essay, so read the analysis first and then I'm going to take you through everything. Okay? You see the plan? I'm streaming the class, so if you have friends right, sitting at home, got nothing better to do, you can ask them to. I can send you the link as well. If you know anyone wants to see. I'm just piloting it, so let's see how it goes, yeah? Hi. You can sit there or you can sit behind. Is the camera blocking? Am I blocking you? 15 minutes, 10 minutes, about 10 minutes. Then we'll start. Ten more minutes, Hi. Yes, here. Okay. Unless you want to sit behind the tablet, that's fine too. So go through this, just do the analysis first, and then we'll go through in a while. If you've done the analysis, then you can read the question. yourself at least a chance to look through all the questions first. Just if you're running out of time, just focus on 1 and 2. 3 is quite easy. So I'm going to worry too much about 3. Maybe 1 and 2. Five more minutes. Minutes. Running out of time, at least try to look at question 2. 3 is quite, I hope you find 3 straightforward. Especially if you've been in the class for a while, I think 3 is quite doable. If you're done, let's go ahead. You can read the first question analysis first. Okay, come, shall we? Let's go to page 3. So, first things first, like last week, right, I've included a couple of extra question outlines for y'all at the back. So, I give y'all another 3 questions. So, based on yesterday's class, no time to go through one. We'll probably take almost the entire 2 hours to just run through the 3 model essays. So, the remaining 3 is for your own practice. You do it, I'm happy to mark it. You can just pass it to me. Okay, but there are some extra questions behind. They're from EJ. So the first 3 questions from EJ. Not bad questions. I'll tell you a little bit more about them later at the end of class. Okay. Start question 1 first. In the small island economy of Singapore, producers face different constraints from those in larger economies. Explain how firms in Singapore will be affected by constraints such as having a small domestic market and a lack of natural resources. A lack of resources. Now, most of you will probably identify this as a firm impact question, right? That's what it is, the impact on firm question. The biggest challenge with questions like that is that they never ever tell you I want profits, right? They tell you that, oh, I want impact, I want to know how they'll be affected, I want to know how constraints will affect them, but it's really about profits. So that's the first thing you need to realize. Anytime we ask you anything about, oh, why do firms do this, or how do firms get affected, it always comes down to profits. If it's about profits, then it's about revenues and costs, right? So again, this comes back to what I always train you, which is how do you think about questions? Very important, that's your scope, right? So this tells you that you have 2 major pillars. I need revenue, I need cost. And then you come back and look at a question and you realize, hey, there's 2 factors that fits very nicely into this. Small domestic market and then for cost is lack of resources. So we can think of the essay fundamentally in 3 parts, as you will see. You introduce the concept of profits, you talk about revenues, impacted by the small domestic market, and then cost. It's a part A, it's a firm's question, it's about profits. You cannot run away from having a diagram. Okay? You cannot run away from having a diagram. Okay? Just a quick point, because I was marking a couple of essays recently, and I think one of the most common pitfalls, right, that people face is that they confuse firm questions with demand and supply questions. And I think you can see how some people will totally do this as a DDSS. And my advice is this. If it's a firm question, they say firm. If it's DDSS, they'll say market. They'll never ask you for impact on market, but actually mean that they want you to talk about firms. If they want you to talk about firms, they'll say firm, they'll say market structure, they might say industry, but they'll never say market. If they say impact on market, right, it will be a DDSS question. Okay, so you must be mindful like that. Again, it comes back to what I say. You need to get enough questions under your belt. Try to look at 10, 20, 30 questions from each chapter. Get a sense of what these questions look like, what do they need, and then you can cut out mistakes like that. Okay, let's start with the model essay properly. The introduction, a small domestic market and a lack of resources would affect the profits of Singaporean firms, as these factors translate into a limitation on firm demand, as well as raised costs of production. Profits of firms are affected by total revenue and total cost. So very simple, I always say intro, right? Just go for clarity. and direction. Clarify some key terms and then set a direction. Another way I like to think about this is I say, think of your introduction, your direction as a one-sentence answer to the question. Right? That's what I gave. I say that it's affected, it's going to affect profits. And then the rest of the essay just goes into how it's going to affect profits. A profit maximizing firm sets output where MR is equals to MC, where the last unit of good produced adds as much to cost as to revenues, maximizing profits. This is shown in the diagram below. Okay, so figure 1, I label it as a Singaporean firm, so a very standard firm diagram. Now, some of you might think that, hey, why don't I just skip this step and I go into revenues and costs? So kind of do it as a 2-paragraph thing and then just focus on diagrams for those two things. I'll go into a bit more detail on why I chose to do this later, but the main challenge you have is you might find yourself having to repeat the terminology for the shifting, for the AR, for the MR. So sometimes it's a bit neater to just, here's what profits is, and then everything else refers back to this diagram. This is what's going to shift later on. Okay? So very quickly, just standard. Firm diagram, right? Okay. That's what we went with. Figure 1, the explanation. So every time you draw, please remember you explain. Figure 1 shows a hypothetical Singaporean firm operating under an imperfect competition market structure with a downward sloping demand curve and possesses pricing power. Now, it's a very good habit to, when you draw diagrams, be mindful that you're showing a scenario or an example. So write it like it's a scenario example. Because it doesn't have to be an imperfect competition firm, right? From a marker point of view, always remember, you have to write the essay, especially part A, as if the marker knows nothing. So you're supposed to explain things to them. So it's like, okay, here's a Singaporean firm, we assume there's imperfect competition, here's what the diagram looks like. Okay? It has a down sloping demand curve. Sorry, that is just elaborating on pricing power now. The ability to vary prices subject to the law of demand, where QD would fall with higher prices and vice versa. The AR curve is also the demand curve, and the MR curve is lower and twice as steep. If you want an example of how to write an explanation for when you do questions that ask you about profits, this is roughly what it should look like. Okay? We don't really define everything. There's no like AR is this, TR is what, demand is met. There's no type. Okay? So you're going to keep it compact, focus on the more essential stuff. But the basic concept must be there. Okay, the MR curve is lower and twice as steep. There's no need to go into why that's the case. That's not the focus of the question. This profit maximizing firm will set Q star where MC equals to MR and sets the corresponding price P star as given by the AR curve. So, as usual, remember, if you're still confused with the firm diagram, always look for MCMR first, which gives you your quantity. That's step 1. Go back to your demand curve. Step 2 gives you the price. Okay? And then AC will be where you touch the AC curve, right, at that quantity. That's how you determine AC. Where am I? Okay, so given by the AR curve, total revenue is the area bounded by OP star, XQ star. So I'm just describing the revenue area. And total cost is the area bounded by O, AC, Y, Q star. The difference between the two areas is your supernormal profits that the firm makes, denoted by the area profits. If you lack time for this essay, this part is the part you compress. You can't do without, but you can compress it. You can cut a bit of lines about the profit maximizing rate or last unit produced. You can cut a bit about the MR and AR being downward sloping. At the end of the day, remember this, right? When I tell you to cut things, it's not that you don't score marks for having them. It's kind of like if you have no time, right? You're going to cut off the lid or risk losing the entire body, which is like one entire essay, right? You spend too much time here, it accumulates, oh no, 15 marks, not done, right? Then that's how you fail. So good to have, right? But you want to make sure that you balance your time constraint. A small domestic market means that there are a small number of consumers who are willing and able to purchase the goods or services produced by the firm. What did I do here? I paraphrase the definition of demand into the context. So this is the best way you can link the context, the question, to theory. If you cannot separate them, it's fine, right? Say small domestic market means there's very few people, very small population. Then you can say small population means demand will be small. Things like that. It doesn't have to be complex, right? You just have to make sure that you make an effort to link the theory to whatever is given to you in the preamble. In Singapore's case, this is the direct result of our relatively small population. While households are wealthy on a per capita basis, the small number of them means that there's a limit to the demand for a particular firm, which limits the amount of revenues and profits they can earn. Is the wealthy on a per capita basis bit important? No, absolutely not. Not in the context of this question. But I'm just trying to help you understand, right? You want to be holistic. One of the questions you have is, hey, Singapore is so rich, right? Your demand should be quite high. Yes, right? But there's a limit to how many meals you can eat, how many pairs of pants you will buy. So as opposed to a country that is not so rich on a per capita basis, but there are more people, right? Like China, we've talked about China for a very long time. But China's per capita income is but a fraction of Singapore's. But that doesn't change the fact that their economy is way bigger than what we are already, right? They are smallest firms, right? So, like a small education company, tuition is big in China, obviously. They have 2 listed companies that do tuition. They earn multi-billion dollars, right, doing tuition. That's how crazy it is, right? Because although, yeah, the average purchasing power is not very high, but you got a lot of people, you got millions of students. Singapore, one batch of JC kids only like 20,000. Right, China one batch is in the millions. They churn out 7 million graduates a year. Right? So that's the power of having the numbers. So that's what I'm trying to illustrate over here. But the key is the second half of this sentence where I link to say the amount of revenues and profits they can earn is limited. A limited demand means that the AR and MR curves of the firm will be lower than similar firms in other larger countries with larger populations. Now here's where things could go wrong for you. This is why I did the profit max first and then I talk about this. Because one of the biggest temptations that people will have when they do this part is they might be inclined to describe something like that. That means people are going to start saying things like, oh, you know, because we've got a small population, demand will fall. That's when you can be sure that your marks will be 5 out of 10. Because that's wrong. Your demand will not fall. Singapore's demand rose over the years from the time we started as an economy until today. It rose. Our income went up, our population went up a bit. It rose. It wouldn't have fallen. It's just that our demand will not be as high as a larger country. So if you wanted to draw this diagram, you could, but you wouldn't put in the arrow. Right? You would just say that a Singaporean firm's demand will be limited up to here. We can never get there. We can never get to AR. Right? We can never get to AR and MR. We'll be here. Which means that your Q and P will be lower than if you were a large country. Make sense? Right? You don't even need a firm diagram to tell you this. You know from a fact that demand and supply, if demand is lower, right, price and quantity will be lower, revenues will be lower, profits will be lower. Okay, and if you're still confused by this diagram, always go and start by hunting for where your MC cuts MR. Find the quantity, quantity gives you the price, then it's not so confusing. Okay? So this is the reason why I did the basic diagram first. So I just do the basic diagram, then I reference my explanation to that. Then I don't need to draw this. This is a nightmare to draw. Because you don't forget that if you draw this, right, this one cannot show you the cost part of the equation later, you know. So you have to draw another diagram for part A. That's how you end up failing part B, right? Because you spend 2 over pages on part A. Not realistic. Right now. Okay, so bottom of page 3, lower AR and MR curves translate into a lower profit maximizing level of output and price, resulting in lower total revenue and lower profits. With reference to figure 1, if AR and MR were lower, they would be further left, resulting in a lower Q star where MC equals to MR is achieved, and thus lower prices and revenue translating into lower profits. Right? So you don't need to draw a separate diagram just to illustrate the point. You just kind of leverage on what you already have. Okay? So this is also what I mean. I always tell you, right, if diagrams like this are not a must-have, simply because they take so much time to draw, and then you still have to explain them. So what you saw in this paragraph is an example, of how to explain as if the diagram is there. So you still use the terminology. You still use your AR, your MR, your MC, your Q star, your profit maximizing, but you don't actually have the diagram. You just give a rigorous explanation about the process of what will happen. Okay? On the other hand, the lack of resources means a limited supply of factors of production, which will translate into higher cost of production for firms. Right? So you've got limited supply. As your demand for goods and services rise, demand for factors of production rise, you're going to see a rise in cost of production. For example, the lack of labor due to a small population means that wages tend to be high, translating to high variable costs for firms. You need to be specific, you still need to be rigorous. Do you have to use variable costs? No, but I use labor, right? And labor by default in economics is always variable cost. So of course, the impact of rising variable cost would be like that, right? This is the scenario that we are basically describing. Okay. So higher variable costs, define variable costs. They are costs that vary directly with the amount of output produced, and the firms tend to require more workers when producing a greater amount of output, such as in the tourism sector, where more service staff is required. Okay, so put in an example to illustrate the point of why they might need to incur more variable costs. So higher variable costs for firms mean higher AC and MC curves, which is what I drew for you, resulting in a lower profit maximizing level of output but higher prices. However, the rise in AC and MC will translate into higher total costs despite a smaller output level, and this increase is likely to be more significant than the change in total revenue, resulting in lower profits. So the main idea is very simple, because your AC and MC are shifting. So the change in total cost will be more significant than your change in total revenue, because we're just moving along the demand curve here, but my entire cost is shifting up. Okay, so the impact is likely to be disproportionate. You don't have to prove it, you just have to know that that's going to be the case. Okay? So it's also not a hard question if you figure out the structure, right? I think the key is finding the right examples, because they did say Singapore, right? They did say Singapore, right? Yeah, they did say Singapore, right? So the key is about finding the right examples to kind of illustrate what's wrong in the Singapore context, and then just linking it into theory. It's not a very hard question to do, right? Very doable. 7 to 8 shouldn't be an issue. Okay, that's part A. Part B is the challenging one. Okay, so let's think about the structure for B. So the question said policies, and then let's say government policies, and then firm policies. Right. So let's address the firm policy bit first. This is supposed to be the easy bit, but this is where you can be your own worst enemy, because you're like, oh, firms got no policy, right? So some people just ignore it. Oh, I just focus on government policy because I don't know of any firm policy. That can't be the case, right? So think about it. What's the closest thing you can think of? It's going to be firm behavior. Right? It's about what firms can do to change the situation. Right? So you already know, because they're linking back to the constraints again, you need firm behavior that can raise revenue, right? Raising demand, and then lowering costs. Right? That's basically the direction that you're going in. For government, this one's tricky, this one's difficult. Because there's nowhere in your lecture notes or your text or my notes even that will have this. Zero. Nothing at all. So you're forced to fall back on other chapters and things you might know to help you formulate the necessary policies, right? But what will help you is that you also know that you need to raise revenue and lower cost here. So what kind of thing comes to mind? Right? What can the government do to raise demand for firms and lead to higher revenue and profits? Some people might think, oh, why don't you just use fiscal policy, raise G? Possible? Yeah, but not great, Because you will hit a wall in your explanation very quickly. You're going to realize that as you explain, then you're like, how is this a sustainable solution to overcome the constraints? It doesn't work. The government can't keep spending money, right? The government is part of your domestic economy, right? They're part of the limitation, correct? So the best example, think real life, right? What does Singapore do? You embrace trade. So you use FTAs to raise revenue. This is extremely sustainable, right? You sign FTAs, you help to lift the demand for your firms because you don't just sell to your domestic economy. You sell to overseas markets. You sell to more people in the region. You get a tap on China's 1.3 billion people. You get a tap on India's billion people, right? So that's the direction you have to think in. If you don't get to the conclusion that it's an FTA, it's fine. Because at the end of the day, you must remember this. Because it's an application question, they don't, they're not so harsh on what example you use. Meaning that if you do market failure and it's healthcare, it's education, taxes and subsidies, that one you cannot go wrong. That's quite textbook. Right? But in this case, because this is non-standard, they're going to mark you more on your theoretical rigor of the link to firms than they are about what example you are using. You see, that's the key. You don't have to call it FTA. The thing is, you just need to come up with something reasonable. Maybe you read something in the news, right, that says that the government is doing this. Fine, sure. You just need to find some way to make some sense of it. Because at the end of the day, you must remember, this is a hard question. Which means that if you are forced to do it, your first thought process is, I need to damage control. I need to have two sides, I need to have these four things. Even one of the points not very well explained, it will not sink your essay. You can still at least get a high L2. So that's the direction you need to think in. Never let the lack of example hold you back. Always start with what's the theory, what am I going to try to explain. Lowering cost, the easiest to come up with would be, any ideas what do you come up with? Huh? SSP, right? SSP is the easiest to go with. Education and training, subsidizing R&D, right? Any one of these things. You can even go and talk about something obscure like, I can't remember if it was a prelim question or a TYS question, but there's this question about foreign worker levy and all that, and how it affects firms. I'm not sure if you've seen that question before. So one of the ways they can help is, you can cut foreign worker levy, right? Or you allow foreign workers to come into work. It's actually a globalization point, but you don't have to say globalization. See, so there's a ton of things, right, that can help you explain this. The key is you need to first realize government is trying to help you lower costs. Then you just try to find the example that can link to the lower cost. The rest of the explanation is a traditional firm explanation. You get what I'm trying to say? So that's the way to think about it. Now, coming back to this, before I go to the essay itself, of course we know that as far as firm behavior is concerned, to raise revenue, we could do price comp or non-price competition. Right, we got two options. First of all, you got no time to do both for this question. I think it's quite obvious. It's very demanding on this question because you got four things, you still need limitations. So you don't have time to do all sorts of firms behavior. So then there's a question of, do you use price competition or non-price competition? I hope it's obvious to most of you that this should be what you're inclined towards. The problem with price competition is this. You got a small market. You can cut price, there's a limit to how cheap you can go. Right? There's a limit to how many people you can sell to still. That doesn't really help to overcome the constraint. Okay? So non-price competition will be a better point. Okay? So once you've got that figured out, then it's really talk about these four things: limitations, contextualize, evaluate. Okay, let's start. Let's say proper. To overcome these constraints, firms and governments will have to employ policies to raise demand or lower cost in order to increase profitability of firms. Okay, simple, sweet, short and sweet. Just go straight to the point. Firstly, the government can subsidize R&D, right? The R&D cost of firms in order to encourage greater adoption of technology and greater productivity, leading to lower costs and higher profits. Now here's the thing, right? If you're using macro concept for micro essays or vice versa, there's never a need to go into the macro thing in a micro essay. No one will mark you for, you didn't identify this as SSP, you didn't tell me how it affects AD and AS. No one cares. Just subsidize R&D and then move on. Focus on how it helps the micro context. Okay, that's another mistake that people make. You must remember that you really have no time. Right? You really have no time. So you cannot afford to talk about these frivolous things. Go straight to make sure that everything you are saying is hitting the question right on the spot. Okay? Leading to lower costs and higher profits. Now, just something very quickly, right? Do you all know what the consequence is on a firm in the short run when they engage in R&D? What do we shift in the diagram? Okay, so when you engage in R&D or any kind of non-price competition, product development, this is a short run effect. Okay? So this is something that happens but we don't always talk about. So of course in my example it's a bit extreme lah. Because of the way I draw it, you go from profit to loss. But doesn't have to be the case lah. It can be profit to smaller profit, to normal profit, to small loss, to big loss. It depends on how much you spend on R&D. Right? So this is something that happens, but we don't talk a lot about. We just kind of take for granted that, oh, you R&D, you product differentiate, your demand will rise. But before that happens, this happens first. Logical, right? Basically, the company is sacrificing short-term profits for long-term profits. Right? Of course, in the case of what we are talking about here, productivity, cost cutting up, you are hoping that your AC and MC will fall eventually as you improve productivity. Okay? That's what you are hoping for. Do we see this in real life? Absolutely. Amazon made losses for more than a decade because they keep plowing money into building warehouses. Right? I've shared this example a lot, which is why you get Amazon Prime, you get 2-hour deliveries, because they got an entire network of warehouses, which has driven up their demand, but have definitely also lowered their cost. You know, basically the funny thing is, as Amazon is growing, they use FedEx and DHL a lot. Now their internal transport system is so big, right? They are like almost competition with FedEx and DHL. They got their own jumbo jets that they can do cargo delivery with. It's no joke. Okay? So this is the short-term impact, which is why the government subsidizing and paying for R&D is important. Because the point is that they, by paying for the firm, encourage the firms to take the risk to go and R&D, to go and buy capital goods, to go and innovate and improve their processes. Okay, so the example I've used here, line number 3. For example, the Singapore government introduced the Productivity and Innovation Credit Scheme, the PIC, to encourage firms to adopt technology in their businesses, to help them to lower costs and reduce a reliance on labor, where labor scarcity in Singapore has translated into higher and higher wages. Why is this important? Because you're linking back to the question, the constraint. Okay, so remember this. Good theory, good rigor, yes, important. But you cannot not link back to the question. You always need to come back and make an explicit link to the question. Okay? So this is the reason why more than half the sushi restaurants in Singapore now is ordering by iPad. Right? You go in, you sit down, you take out the iPad, you order, and they bring you food. That was largely because of the PIC scheme. A lot of these companies bought the iPads, bought the systems, and then they put them in place, and it actually helps them to cut labor costs. So it will lower their variable costs over time. They don't need to hire so many workers during like peak season and whatnot. They just use the iPads as an ordering system. Ordinarily, a firm engaging in R&D or adopting new technology on their own costs would experience a rise in fixed costs. Okay? Defined in brackets, costs that do not vary directly with output. Please do not abuse brackets. I've seen people that like to write essays and put bracket and then half the paragraph is in brackets. Don't. The brackets are just there, like if it breaks the flow of your essay, you can just define one or two things in brackets. Right? But don't spend the whole essay with it. Okay? Resulting in a higher AC curve and lower profits in the short run, which is exactly what I showed you here, as total costs rise, but revenue stays unchanged. However, the government subsidy this lowers the impact of the rising AC. Either AC don't rise by so much, or it doesn't rise at all. Right? And we encourage more firms to utilize such technology. In the long run, this will translate into two benefits. If R&D and adoption of technology is effective, this lowers variable costs over time. as firms reduce their reliance on labor, as well as the second part is increase in productivity. To increase in productivity means increase in the efficiency of your existing labor, right? This lowers, where they are able to produce more output at each given price level. You know why I use this phrase? Where did I borrow this phrase from? Supply. Because S is equals to MC, right? If you think about it, when my MC curve shifts right, meaning shift down, what does it mean? At every output level, my marginal cost is now lower than before. What's the significance of that? In demand and supply, you learn that S equals to MC. And we learned that in minimum, firms need to charge P equals to MC, right? Price needs to cover the extra cost of producing that one extra unit of good or service. So if your MC is lower, then in essence, the firm is able and willing to sell more goods and services at each and every price level, because it now costs me less to produce each and every unit of extra output. Right? So the supply explanation helps us to lend some rigor to the explanation. Both these outcomes lead to falling MC and AC curves, lowering total costs and increasing profits, as can be seen in figure 2 below. And that takes us to page 5. Okay, takes us to page 5. So again, this diagram still gives you nightmares, right? Look for the MC, MR, give your quantity, and then label the price and the average cost. Okay, I included a diagram here, but you don't really have it, honestly. I always tell you this diagram is kind of optional. If you don't have time, just kind of drop it. It's not worth investing the time to go and go. Okay. So a very brief explanation of the mechanism from figure 2. Long-run impact is shown as the rightward shift in AC and MC curves. Right, the cost of producing each unit of output falls, leading to firms being more able and willing to produce and sell goods at every price level. That's what I said about the supply point. This results in an increase in profits, helping Singapore overcome the problem of lacking resources through lowering costs by productivity gains. So part of why I chose this explanation, talk about PIC, all that, is because that's one of the best examples we have in recent years. And the whole point is, it's a productivity drive. So that is something that's happening right now. We do want to improve our competitiveness, produce more cheaply by increasing productivity, making people more efficient, introducing more capital into production processes. Okay, this was particularly effective in helping smaller firms in monocom due to their lack of ability to spend on research and development on their own expense, as they lack the long-run profits to finance such endeavors. Okay, so that's a contextualization. Then we go into limitations. Okay, there are a few, you don't need to do all. Again, for teaching purposes, my essay is a bit long. Nonetheless, there's no guarantee that such schemes will be effective, as it could perverse incentives and cause firms to invest indiscriminately on technology, whether or not they actually translate into improvements in productivity. Because they subsidize. If they subsidize heavily enough and they make things really cheap, firm will just anyhow spend the money. Which means, although the government avoids this in the short term by helping the firm pay for it, this will not happen. Then there's no gain in productivity. Right? How do you come out at this point? SSP, right? We say SSP as the basis for our suggestion for cost cutting. You should realize that SSP's one of the biggest arguments is that it does not guarantee outcomes. Right? So that's something you can use. This again can be seen in the number of companies exploiting the PIC scheme to buy tablets and smartphones for their staff's personal use. I kid you not, there are people that buy PS4, right, and put in the office. God knows how they increase productivity, right? But they do. So there are people who will abuse the scheme. But in a more benign fashion, there are companies that might just spend indiscriminately buying software and all that, and they might not actually use it, or it might not really benefit them, but they just spend it anyway, right? So that's a massive waste of resources. In addition, this could reduce the incentive of firms to be cost efficient, to maximize profits, translating into higher costs that could offset any potential gain in productivity, correct? You can't finance my R&D, you can't help me buy capital goods to make things cheaper for me to produce. I got less incentive to be cost efficient, right? I got less incentive to be cost efficient. Okay, and then I talk about when it might be a problem. In a monopoly or oligopoly, they really lack competitive pressure. If the government does this, it could exacerbate the problem.
Questions? Anything so far? Secondly, the government could help Singapore firms sell to more consumers abroad by signing FTAs, reducing tariffs, and increase the export competitiveness of local firms, increasing the demand for their goods and services. With lower tariffs, Singaporean firm exports cost less in these countries, resulting in foreign consumers buying more of Singaporean goods and services, which translates into a rising demand for Singaporean firms. Now, let me clarify something to you. So, what's going on, right, is actually like that. Okay? Let's say we are exporting to China. If China cuts tariffs because we sign FTA with them, price in China falls. As in, with this being demand from Singapore goods and services. Right? But when we translate it to the Singapore market, it's a rise in demand. Why? Because prices change in China. Did it change in Singapore when you sign FTAs? No. So at the same price level, let's say PO, more people want to buy your goods and services. Right? So if this, let's say, rose by 100, then this would have risen by 100. This same rule applies when we talk about exchange rates. Which is why it's so important when we talk about exchange rates that we say when you depreciate, price of exports changes in foreign currency. Because when US currency changes against Singapore, against Japan, an iPhone is still cost you a kidney in the US, right? It doesn't change. Or however much it is, 1099 or 1299 for it. Right? In US dollars. What changes is how much you pay as a Singaporean. Because you are foreign. So in your domestic market, it translates as a change in quantity demanded because the price that you pay is different. But from the US perspective, right, from the other country's perspective, they experience a change in demand. Okay? Which means that it will, if you put in a supply curve, it will eventually lead to changing prices. Right? Because demand shift, price adjustment process, it will go up. It will. Right? But the most immediate impact here is if you cut tariffs, people are going to buy more of your goods and services, and that translates into rising demand for your country. So the firm demand, the AR and MR experience a rise. It's not a movement. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Okay? It's a rise in demand. Okay, so the shift in demand will lead to a rightward shift of the AR and MR curves, resulting in a higher profit maximizing level of output and price that gives these firms higher revenue and more profits. And this can be shown in figure 3 below. Okay? So again, the diagram is not super important, but for teaching purposes, I've drawn it. And move on to page 6, if you're already done copying. So brief explanation, right? Figure 3, FTAs lead to AR, MR shifting rightwards. Equilibrium at Q1, P1, higher profits, revenue increase more than cost. Again, cost in this case, we're shifting demand, but we're just moving along the AC curve. So the revenue change will be larger than the total cost change. However, FTAs could also harm the demand of some domestic firms as the removal of tariffs is imposed in the countries of both trading partners or all trading partners in multilateral trade agreements. Right, what does that mean? Right, bilateral trade is when we agree between two countries. Multilateral is many parties. Right? So that's multilateral and bilateral trade. How do we know that this is a limitation? Again, we are borrowing concepts from trade, right? That where we actually pick this point from. FTAs, you pick your limitation from trade. So you understand that although some firms will benefit, right? But in some other instances, it's the other way around. You are the importer. You lift tariffs, you're going to import more, your domestic firms will suffer. They will face a fall in demand. Right? Why? Okay, so say For example, you are Korea, you talk about cars, okay, versus German cars. So what you have is, so say for example, we talk about what am I drawing? Oh yeah, right. Sorry. Okay, both cases being Korea, okay? So let's say it's a Kia, which is a Korean brand, and then you got, okay, still Korea, but we talk about BMW. Okay, so if you lift tariffs, it's like that, right? You remove tariffs. You're going to buy more BMWs locally. Then what happens here in the market for Kia? Why? Price of interrelated goods. Right. That will be the mechanism behind it. So you see, you need to be very clear with your mechanisms. You don't have to explain this. There's no time to go into all these details. But this is how we know that the impact will be as such. So we have to do some rigor, some theoretical consistency in our explanation. Okay? When import tariffs are lowered, the third line of this paragraph, when import tariffs are lowered, the domestic firm would face lower demand as imports become relatively cheaper and rational consumers switch to these imported goods and services. The fall in demand will then translate into lower revenue and profits, exacerbating any existing limitation of a small market demand. Again, try your best to link back as much as possible. This can be seen in Singapore, where homegrown fashion brands find it almost impossible to survive, facing strong competition from China's factories. They are able to produce comparable products at lower prices. Many firms have since shut down as they are unable to make even normal profits in the long run. So you see, I didn't even give much limitation, just one, because the essay is really, really, really long. Otherwise. Okay, Singaporean firms could also engage in non-price competition to raise demand for their goods and services. Why did I do government first? You're going to see in this paragraph, because I had intent to merge the FTA and the non-price the non-price competition argument together, right? Because if you do it the other way around, then you're going to find a lot of difficulty making the case that just by doing non-price competition, you can get more demand. You're still limited by your small market size. Can you see that? Okay, so firms could innovate and produce differentiated products that better appeal to the tastes and preferences of customers by differentiating based on, okay, so when I teach product differentiation, which is your non-price competition, right, I always teach you three things, right, to give you a bit more breadth and depth in your answer. There are physical differences, color, size, shape, material. Imaginary, which has to do with brand image, brand loyalty, right? Like some people like Nike, they'll never buy Adidas. Some people like this celebrity, they're brand ambassador for this brand, they'll never buy the other brand. That's all imaginary, right? It's not really because one product is better than the other. And the last one is what we call point of sale. So point of sale has to do with the experience of buying the good or the service. Where is the place? How is the place decked up? How many service staff do they have? Do they give you free water? How do they treat you? Do they greet you? That's all point of sale experience. Okay, so over here, I give a couple of examples: physical characteristics, imaginary differences, point of sale improvements. For example, in recent years, due to the influx of Chinese tourists, many Singaporean retailers have hired Chinese salespeople to converse with their customers in Mandarin. I kid you not. You go to Europe today, you go to a boutique in Paris, you go to somewhere in Germany, you will see one Chinese salesperson at least in there speaking Mandarin to you. Okay, it's happening in Europe, it's happening in the US, it's happening all around the world because more and more Chinese tourists are going out, and the vast majority of them, unless they're schooled abroad, don't really speak that much English, right? So they want to make people comfortable, make their customers comfortable, they want to make their point of sale better, they hire Chinese salespeople. That's the point of sale argument.
Or even produce goods in auspicious colors such as red and gold to appeal to these customers.
You know what's an example? You all might laugh, right? I think it's funny, right? Like who made gold stuff and all that? Apple made gold phones for the Chinese market. Before iPhone 5, iPhone came in 2 colors. It's white or black. And then iPhone 5 onwards, there was gold. Right? Why? Because China was becoming an increasingly important market for them. And then after that, the iPhone Red, I'm not sure you all know. As in, they did the tie-up with the charity that donates money for, I can't remember what it's for, but they did the iPhone Red. Right? Recently, they did dual SIM, also for China market. So that's product differentiation to appeal to taste and preferences. Right? That's exactly how you do it. You raise demand by giving your customers what they want.
This will have the effect of raising demand, translating into higher revenues and profits, with a process similar to how FTAs will raise profits for firms. Why did I say this? Because you're not going to do the whole mechanism again, draw the diagram again, makes no sense. Coupled with FTAs, such non-price strategies will be highly effective in raising their demand to both consumers that purchase goods and services domestically, as well as foreigners who buy their exports. Okay, so that's what I was telling you just now. I want to combine, so I went with FTA first, so that I can bring this in and combine the argument. Nonetheless, the extent to which this is possible depends on the market structure that these firms operate in. For the luxury fashion firms that operate in Singapore, they are oligopolistic and tend to earn supernormal profits over time. Just a quick note, this question, right, actually they didn't say Singapore, so you don't have to use Singapore. They actually just talk about firms generally to overcome the constraints, but nothing stopping you from using Singapore. Okay? So luxury fashion firms are oligopolistic. This gives them a greater ability to invest heavily in R&D, to improve product quality by using more expensive and exotic materials, or to spend more on advertising to breed brand loyalty, or even to spend heavily on greater consumer experiences, such as Louis Vuitton's floating shop in front of the MBS. You know where that is? They have this like glass building that's right in front. Like everyone's shop is inside, LV shop is in front of Marina Bay Sands. It lights up at night, it's quite nice. You go there by Link Bridge. Okay? For firms in monocom, such as hawkers, they are less able to differentiate their products substantially in order to significantly raise demand and profits. This is due to a lack of supernormal profits and so a lack of funds to invest meaningfully in product differentiation. They could merely resort to basic changes to their menus and dishes to appeal to certain tastes and preferences, limiting the effectiveness of raising demand and profits. Right, so hawker, they cannot, how to change? Right, you make gold-plated chicken rice, you can't really do that. Right, but we know that nowadays you want to do F&B, you want to appeal to the trend, you do 2 things. You either do mookata or you do hot pot. Right, everyone is eating hot pot nowadays. You know what Hai Di Lao is, right? So that's become a very, very, very big thing here. So, next paragraph, firms without the aid of government could also engage in cost-cutting measures on their own accord by improving productivity of existing workers and processes. Smaller firms in monocom could train their workers by leveraging on free information on the internet or using books to learn best practices and improve worker productivity through better workflows and specialization of labor. Now, this whole sentence, right, is almost entirely made up. Because there's nothing that you have learned that will help you to explain this, correct? But the key is we try to bring in things that have some rigor. So we talk about specialization of labor. That one you know. Right? You know that if workers specialize, you improve the work process, you can actually cut costs. So that's what I mean by they're not going to care about what your example. They won't mark you down because, oh, no one do this one. No one say use free information can improve productivity. They're not going to go after that. They're going to look at whether or not you can find a reasonable example to link to the theory or not. Oligopolistic firms can afford more sophisticated systems and capital investments that could result in greater productivity, such as Amazon's automated warehouses that utilizes a complex system of robots and trolleys that automatically sort and pack goods to be shipped to consumers. In both cases, productivity gains will result in lower AC and MC as variable costs fall due to a fall in labor reliance or an increase in labor productivity. This can raise profits similar to that shown in figure 2. Okay? Now, I hope by now as you read along, what do you think the evaluation is? Which one is more important? How are we going to evaluate? You know that you definitely need to say combine, right? We almost never
do a policy question without combining. So it's definitely within firms and government. But if you are really a country that has a small domestic market and lack resources, you cannot live without the government. The government policies are way more important in setting the stage for you to overcome your constraints. And that's the angle that I went for here. So there are a variety of policies that both firms and governments could employ to overcome the constraints. For a country like Singapore, government involvement is particularly important as there is a limit to how much firms can cut costs and raise demand domestically. No matter how firms engage in non-price competition, without FTAs, the small domestic market will still limit demand. You want to score evaluation marks, you must make statements like this. This is insight. This is real life. The body was analyzing scenarios. While firms are able to cut costs on their own, the higher demand from FTAs could even allow large firms to reap IEOS as they achieve a higher level of output and invest in more fixed factors. Thus, it is crucial that firm policies are combined with that of governments to collectively overcome the constraints. Okay, the question is doable. I wouldn't consider it easy, but it's doable, mainly because where you can mess up is the government policy bit. If you can't come up with the right policies, then you're not going to do very well. Okay? So last year, actually, micro was a bit of a killer. I'm not sure how you feel, right? If you look at the 3 questions, the only one that's really doable is question 3. And the problem with question 3 is, if you never studied the transport market, you're likely to screw it up as well. You could probably deliver on the theory, at least get a 14 out of 25, but without the good contextual arguments, it's very hard to get 18, 19, 20. So last year was a bit quite brutal, but somehow last year's batch still did very well, so I guess it's doable. The macro was more forgiving, so you can do question 3. I think most people did 3, 4, 5 or something. The macro was quite easy. We'll do the macro next week. Okay. Question 2. Question 2 is demand and supply. Right? Part A already give you headache. So why did part A give you headache? Because the general rule, right, you do demand and supply so long, you know that the general rule is you need demand and supply factors, right? But no matter how hard you stare at the preamble, there is no supply factor that tell you why prices rise, correct? So how? Okay, then we dig a bit deeper. You look at the question, you know that you need rapid rise in property prices. Okay? So this is a hint that you already need elasticity. Okay? You are given 2 factors that both happen to be demand factors. Falling interest rates, rising income. So rising income helps you to bring in YDD. And because you know that this is a demand factor, then you know you need to bring in PES to be less than 1. So with 1, 2, 3, 4, more than enough for 10 marks. Right? It's not unprecedented that they give questions that don't need demand and supply. Has happened before. But if they do that, then typically you need elasticity. That's the thing you have to be aware of. But having said that, in this model essay, I'm still a bit kiasu. I still brought in a supply factor. I just didn't draw the diagram for it. I brought it in at the end. You will see it later. Okay? So again, how you think about the question is quite important, right? You always need to figure that, okay, you need an X number of things. You definitely need a shift. You need a price adjustment process. You need to bring in elasticities if you only have one shift. Okay, so let's look at the essay. Preamble mentioned falling interest rates and continued income growth, leading to a rapid rise in residential property prices. This is likely to be due to a combination of demand and supply factors as well as elasticity concepts. So again, very simple, just clarify, give the direction. Firstly, the combination of low interest rates and rising incomes would have led to a substantial increase. Why substantial? I mean rapid rise, so it better be substantial. Demand, defined as the ability and willingness of consumers to purchase property at each and every price level, ceteris paribus, would have risen as rising incomes increases purchasing power of households and lower interest rates lower the cost of buying property on mortgage, right? So you kind of need to use some monetary policy knowledge there, right, to help you make the link. But that's basically what it is. It's not a listed non-price determinant of demand that you have in your notes, but you should be able to do it because you've done macro already. So figure 1, draw a very inelastic supply curve, draw a big shift in demand, and then you get your rapid rise in price. For figure 1, the initial equilibrium exists, D equals to 0, and D equals to D0 equals to S0 and P0 and Q0 when the market clears. With the rise in demand to D1, there's now a shortage at the old price level. Okay, so very standard explanation, right? Like that. Shortage, and then upward pressure. That's what we're describing here. So if you're still struggling with your price mechanism, this is what it needs to look like. You got plug ASA, you got 25 marks. This is the template that you need to have. This leads to utility maximizing consumers to bid up prices for scarce properties, exerting an upward pressure on property prices. As prices rise, firms building and selling properties will increase QS as it is now more profitable to sell them, while some consumers will decrease QD as their real incomes fall. Why? Income effect, right? Switch to substitution effect. This continues until the new equilibrium where D1 equals to S0 at P1 and Q1. Okay, so remember 4 steps. 4-step explanation process. Step 3, the price adjustment process is the most important. That has the most rigor. Now remember this, what's the difference between the adjustment in a shortage and a surplus? A shortage is driven by consumers. Consumers bid up prices. When you have a surplus, it is firms that cut prices to clear excess stock. So you need to be very clear in your explanation who originates the action. Okay? The increase in prices is likely to be substantial, more than proportionate to the increase in equilibrium quantity for 2 reasons. Firstly, YAD for property is likely to be positive for more than 1, as it is a luxury good. As consumers earn higher incomes, they want to buy more and more properties, as these represents investments that can increase their wealth over time. YAD explanation is not like PED, it's not that technical. You just have to illustrate and explain why it's a luxury or why it's a necessity can ready. Real estate investment is also perceived as a luxury good. Together, these factors result in a more than proportionate increase in demand when income rises. Secondly, the PES is likely to be less than 1 and price inelastic. This is because property stock cannot be increased easily due to a lengthy construction period, right? So this is a production time argument. PED and PES have the most stringent factors. So when you explain them and you're trying to justify the value, you need to have the factors. YED not so bad. XED is very easy, it's just relationship and closeness. In addition, Singapore developers face a penalty. This one need a bit of contextual knowledge, but basically this point is no no stock, like you cannot store inventory. So the rule in Singapore is like that. When you are a property developer, you buy a piece of land, you must construct and sell within 5 years. If not, you start paying penalties to the government. So because of that, properties developers will not like build and then they hoard the units and then they take their time to sell. They can't. So at any one point in time, inventory will be very low. There's very little spare capacity, so to speak. Okay, so given a rise in demand, there will be a more than proportionate increase in property prices. Okay, lastly, while supply could have increased as property developers find it cheaper to acquire and develop land, the increase in supply is likely to be smaller than the increase in demand. You know why it's cheaper to acquire and develop land? Because interest rates fall, they find it cheaper to borrow to acquire land. So that's the supply factor that is squeezed out, just to kind of play it safe. So my argument is that the increase in supply is still likely to be smaller than the increase in demand, so prices rose rapidly and by a lot. Developers are likely to have other considerations apart from just interest rates in deciding whether to acquire and develop properties, such as expectations of the future housing prices and the amount of housing supply that already exists. Expectation of future housing prices is a non-price determinant of supply, so a relevant factor. The large YAD is also likely to result in a relatively larger shift in demand than supply. So overall, demand factors, a highly income elastic YAD, a relatively price inelastic PES would have caused a substantial rise in housing prices. Okay? I wouldn't say A is hard, it's just that you need to straighten out your thoughts and be clear on whether you need to bring supply or bring elasticities and all that. B, 2B is the true nightmare question. It's the hardest in the entire first section. You just look at the length of my question analysis, you know already. There's so much long-winded things to tell you, that tells you how hard the question is. So here's the problem, okay? Problem with this question is that what the Singapore government really did in real life cannot be explained by your scope, by the scope of your knowledge. If you bring in what the Singapore government really did, it doesn't even fall nicely into what you learn from macro. Okay? So in my analysis, the first thing I told you is this. In reality, right, the government did three things. They did more than three things, by the way. They did a lot of things, but this is few of the more major ones. Tighten mortgage regulations, raise taxes on individuals who are buying their second or third property, increase the supply of houses and land sales. I just give one example. Just think about number two. How do you model it? How do you draw the impact of government taxing people buying the second or third homes? How to draw? What do you shoot? Then how do you explain the mechanism, right? So it falls beyond the scope of what you can reasonably explain. Then the first one also, right? They tighten mortgage regulations. Like, how much rigor can you put into that? Everything you learn about interest rate is to explain CIAD, multiplier, and so on. How are you going to do this? Then what limitations are you going to raise? Liquidity trap? Right? Cannot. Confidence, not a very good point also, right? So nothing really fits nicely. So they go back to basics. So the strategy and the approach that I use for this essay is very important to teach you one thing. If you face a question like that, the way you construct the answer is very important. What we know for a fact is that you know you need three policies and you need their pros and cons. Right? That's the first thing you should know right now. It's a policy question. I need three policies, pros and cons. Because it's a demand and supply question, I need policies that can help me tackle demand. I need policies that can help me tackle supply as well. Although it's a policy question, because it's not market failure, it's not firms, the policies that we're talking about come out of the post-DDSS chapter, which comes out of price floor, price ceiling, taxes, subsidies. So that's also a starting point to harvest arguments. Now the reality is that as far as you're concerned, you don't really have a nice policy to help you tackle demand, but you can use price ceilings and subsidies as arguments. Okay? So what you'll be lacking after in the equation is you need a long-term solution, which is where you have to suggest a supply solution, which is where point number 3 that I suggested there actually is something that you can reasonably explain about increasing land sales, increasing land supply, and all that. So the way you think about what policies to use for this question, very important. In fact, if you know what happened in real life, that might actually be a handicap. Because then you try to explain it around that, but it doesn't really have good theoretical rigor, you will struggle. If you do price ceiling, you do subsidy, and you just anyhow whack one supply policy, you probably still do even better, because there's a theoretical framework. Whether or not the government does it in real life, that's not the point. They're not testing you on general knowledge. They're testing you on the theoretical validity of the policies that you can raise. Okay, let's start. To curb the rapid rise in prices, the government can implement policies to curb the rise in demand for property, increase the supply of property, or influence market prices through more direct measures such as subsidies or implementing a price ceiling. I did suggest demand reducing policies, but I put that in the evaluation. Okay, just so you know, you'll see it later. The government could implement a subsidy to reduce property prices. A subsidy effectively reduces the cost of production of property, which results in an increase in supply. This gives rise to a surplus at the old price level, exerts a downward pressure, falling price, increase equilibrium quantity. If you want to compress your price mechanism, this is how you do it. Okay? So we draw a supply curve with a very elastic PED. I didn't actually explicitly talk about the PED because the essay is really quite long as it is, but you could actually raise that as a limitation of the subsidy, which is subsidized, but prices won't fall by a lot. because PED is very elastic. This is where people might make mistakes, right? People think that housing, oh, you know, PED inelastic, right? Everyone needs housing. No. Shelter is a necessity. Buying housing is a luxury. The thing that can be considered a necessity is like renting. That one can be considered a necessity. Right? But buying a house is a luxury. Okay, bear that in mind. So that's one reason. The second reason is buying a house takes up a massive percentage of your income. That's why your PED has to be elastic. Okay, it takes up a massive percentage of your income. Okay, so figure 2. The implementation of a subsidy would effectively lower the cost of production for firms, leading to an increase in supply from S0 to S1, increase in supply, create surplus, blah blah blah, system mechanism. Okay? The last sentence is useful, please put it in, link back to the reining in of housing prices. We are now on page 10, we're at the top of page 10. However, there are some limitations to the use of subsidies. So subsidies are quite easy to evaluate, right? We've done a lot of that. Firstly, subsidies are costly and the government has to incur an op cost. Whenever we talk about costly, I say bring in op cost. Right now. Because how costly is costly? We can illustrate costliness by talking about what you have to give up in order to produce the good or service. Okay, op cost is spending on ensuring affordable housing. This could lead to the government giving up spending in other areas such as education and healthcare. That's what I'll always fall back on now. Because that is a real problem. It could mean that I cannot build a new school, I cannot build a new hospital. But because Singapore is generally okay, our fiscal budget is quite fat, we don't really see that. But it is a real issue for a lot of countries around the world. I build one more hospital or I provide cheaper housing means I can't provide something else. So look at countries like UK. UK has free education, they got free healthcare, right? But the problem is they don't really have good affordable housing or public housing scheme. Right? You need to make decisions. So Singapore is kind of the other way. Our education is free, housing is quite okay, but healthcare is like, it's not in ruins, but it's not great. Okay? Secondly, subsidies have to be increased in order to curb further increases in prices should demand rise or supply fall in the future. So a very simple and very real problem is this is a very real possibility, right? With immigration, our population will grow over time. With economic growth, our incomes will grow over time. Singapore will get more and more prosperous. So what happens is that I need to put in a larger and larger subsidy over time, which is just going to get costlier and costlier for the government, isn't it? Right? Because the higher the price, you want to bring it down, your subsidy per unit goes up. So your subsidy gets larger and larger, it gets costlier and costlier for you to subsidize. This will further worsen the cost incurred by the government to maintain affordability. Lastly, so this is actually a contextual argument, this second one. It's not a standard textbook explanation, but it is a real issue. Lastly, subsidies could lead to government failure as it results in an over-allocation of resources towards the construction and sale of properties. Why? Because this market got no failure. Right? This market got no failure. So, in a normal market, right? Q optimal should be equal to Q market, isn't it? So if you get subsidized, what happens? Debit loss from subsidy, correct? That's what you want to have. Okay? So the subsidy will lead to debit loss due to over allocation of resources. Now, I don't think it's TYS, but there was a question I've seen before, very, very interesting question that asks you to discuss the factors that might determine whether a government provides housing for cheap or housing for free, or cannot be free provide housing for cheap. They can ask you this and make it a market failure question, especially in the context of Singapore. Because our housing affordability thing is not driven by just wanting to keep prices down. There's a very big merit good argument behind it. What's the positive externality? Is that if people own their own houses, instead of paying rent is an expense, the money is never coming back. Right? Of course, we recently there's a debate about whether HDB prices, it will rise, it will fall over time. But what doesn't change is the fact that even if your HDB prices fall, you still get some residual value over time. Which means that you sell, you still get some money. You rent, you will never get the money back. Right? You will never get the money back. So what does this help you do? It's suppose, right, in principle, we're not debating about whether it really happens, but in principle, it's supposed to be for retirement. Right? So the positive externality is that it reduces the burden on the government and future generations to help to support the retirees. And then of course the income inequality argument is very obvious. Right? If housing is too expensive, the poor cannot afford to buy. Imperfect information will be the merit of owning over renting. Okay? So just saying there could be a market failure question out of this. But it's not a market failure question, so we went to the easy explanation, which is that there will be government failure if you subsidize. The government could also implement a price ceiling, a legal maximum price for properties that is set below the equilibrium market price. This will directly lower the price of properties and curbs the extent of price increases. This is good because no matter how demand rise, your price will go up. The only problem is the shortage will worsen. Okay, the impact of the price ceiling can be seen in the diagram below. The first issue that people will have with this is they don't dare to write price ceiling because they're like, it's impossible, we don't use it. Right? So don't. First of all, you write an essay, the body is supposed to be theory anyway. I always tell you, do the simple thing first. Theory, pros and cons, then say about whether you already use it or not. The only exception is you cannot say Singapore use interest rate policy. That's the only thing that you absolutely cannot raise. But everything else is fair game. Right? The other thing is Singapore actually has some semblance of this. You need evidence. You know how to buy HDB? You know how it works, right? When you go and buy a HDB next time, right? When you get there, you go and do what you call a BTO, right? You go and buy a BTO. So you go there, you submit the name, you pay a small fee, and then you ballot. You know what a ballot? Ballot means drawing lots, right? Means there's X number of housing units, X number of people want to get married, and then you just draw lots up. So some people get it, some people don't. In economic terms, what's that called? That's called non-price rationing. So you know that we have a price ceiling of sorts because there's the existence of non-price rationing. That's evidence of a shortage. How do we know this shortage got worse? Because PAP had a massive fall in voter count in 2011 because people were unhappy about housing. That was one of the major issues, and then of course after that they started releasing more HDBs. But you know that there was some sort of price ceiling in force, right? Because you know HDBs, right, are basically cheaper than what you buy on the market. So for example, if you get a new HDB in Ang Mo Kio, it's like maybe it's a 5-room flat, it might cost you 400 over 1,000. You buy a second-hand one off someone, it could be like 700 grand, right? So that's how you know there's a price ceiling. It doesn't reflect the true market value, right, of the good. So there's evidence of that. So Singapore does do that. We do have some degree of that. Okay, so figure 3 shows that upon setting a price ceiling at Pmax, it immediately reduces the price in the property market. This will increase affordability for consumers. They are able to buy the Q0 amount of properties supplied by the developers at that price. Why are we so specific? Because the people who cannot get it do not benefit from the low price. In contrast with subsidies, the price ceiling is also effective in preventing further increases in prices. Contextualization, right? Linking of arguments. I can't emphasize this enough. Even if demand were to rise or supply were to fall, since it is illegal to sell above this price. This is seen in Singapore in the form of prices set by HDB in the sale of newly built flats. They are set under market prices to ensure affordability by new home buyers and young couples. So it happens, it is a real thing. However, there are severe limitations in setting a price ceiling. Firstly, there's a shortage that arises since suppliers are less willing to sell property at lower prices, resulting in QS falling when QD is rising. This is allocatively inefficient, there will be a deadweight loss, right, because not the right amount of property is produced and consumed. The lower prices will only benefit those who are able to obtain a property, while the shortage suggests that most will not be able to buy a property, even if they are able and willing to. Secondly, shortages give rise to non-price rationing, since the market is unable to allocate properties to all who are able and willing to pay. Via dollar votes, This is also seen in the HDB market, where consumers are forced to ballot for their HDB flats, where luck and some mitigating factors, such as proximity to their parents, will determine if they're able to get a flat. I have to say this, this year, 2017, was a resurfacing of the need for contextual knowledge to do demand and supply. So this is a year that I would say if you don't have the contextual knowledge, you can't really do it. You're going to struggle because your essay won't flow nicely. You don't have the examples, you cannot articulate, you cannot elaborate. And that has been the reason over the years why I say don't prep for demand and supply. You must be able to do easy questions. Like what? Like the jeans question from 2016, that's a giveaway. That's an essay that you can get 23 out of 25 for because it's so damn easy. Yeah, you can get 10 out of 10 for the first question because nothing like that one is just regurgitation. Right? Part B, you figure out the diagrams, you're going to get very, very high. So that kind you must be able to do. This one, is very tough. So what I always tell you all is when you prepare for essay topics, right, you need to have pet topics. Right? You can have topics that you prefer. But unless you are able to do any type, and I mean any single question I throw you under the sun for that topic, right, you cannot just focus on that topic. The first cut that you pick should always be based on difficulty of the question. Never avoid the topic just because you don't like it. You need to pick based on difficulty. Which means when you prepare, you need to do the easy question types for every single chapter. Right? You need to recognize what's the easy question and be able to do them. Because if you're very stubborn about a pet topic, you will die. Anyone that's experienced in exam, right, you do this question halfway, then like, oh shit, the B is really hard. Then you change question, know exactly what I'm talking about. Right? You go for a pet topic, you're like, wow, that can do, then the part B, oh no, screwed. Right? Then you switch, then you actually cannot finish, then you fail. Then you tell me, oh no, I'm not going to do well. Right? Don't let that happen in A's. Okay? Last one, we are on page 11. For private residential property, as opposed to public housing, the government could reduce prices by increasing their land sales to private developers to build properties. This is a bit challenging because you might not know this is how it works, but this is what happens. The government owns land, they basically sell the raw material to property firms to turn into houses, so they can control the supply indirectly. Okay, for public housing, the government could just increase supply because they control HDB. This works in two ways. Firstly, in the short run, this reduces the cost of production of firms, since a greater land supply leads to lower land prices, right? So it's cheaper for them to buy, they're going to increase supply, cause a lower cost of production. Secondly, the larger supply of land could translate into a greater supply of properties, as more properties can be built and sold. The increase in supply would thus lead to lower prices in the property market, similar to how a subsidy would bring prices down. However, increasing land sales means a smaller land bank for the government. The government has a finite amount of land that they have and they are able to sell, which could translate into lower government revenue in the future, right? You sell more now means you have less to sell in the future. And that gives you two problems. One is you have less avenues to raise money if you need government revenue. So actually one of the sources of government revenue is not just taxes. Land sales is actually one of the things as well in Singapore. Selling too many pieces of land in the short term will result in fewer plots of land available for sale in the future, so lesser revenue and less ability to influence property prices over time. Right? In addition, this could represent a redistribution of wealth from the taxpayers to property developers. Selling more parcels of land at lower costs means producers face lower costs and could earn higher profits, but the taxpayers suffer because the government is getting less revenue than they could have. Right? If they sell land at cheaper prices, it means that you're not getting as much value out of it. It's like OPEC, right? OPEC is not dumb. OPEC over the years have kept oil prices high by restricting supply. They just control how much barrels of oil they sell. Right? So you know that when you can control supply, you can make more money. You sell less, you get a higher selling price for each, you sell over time, rather than selling all at one go. This is also not a viable long-term solution as the government has a finite land bank for sale. In evaluation, much of the policies implemented are targeted at the public housing market, as that is where 80% of the population buy and sell their homes. So it's a bit of contextualization because if you realize most of my examples have to do with HDB. That's the truth, as in all the private market examples, right, you cannot use. Right, because of the mortgage thing, the extra stamp duty thing, there's no way you can use those things. The combination of the above mentioned policies will be highly effective in curbing price inflation, both in the short and long term. Regulating land sales would also help to control the supply of homes over time, so that it grows in tandem with rising income and population, while subsidies and price ceilings serve as effective short-term solutions to curb price increases. However, there are also other policies that are implemented in the private housing market, such as restrictions on mortgages, as well as additional taxes on second properties, in order to discourage investment demand. So these are the factors to bring demand down. That's actually, if you were to write about it, that's the easiest way to explain. It actually reduces demand, right? The mortgage restriction, you can't borrow money so easily, you can't buy as many houses, right? If I tax you, the tax thing is tricky because traditionally for taxes we shift supply, right? But actually in this case, it should shift demand. But you all are not equipped with the mechanism to explain that. That's why I say stay away from it. Okay? Yeah. Ken? Questions? No? Really? No questions at all? Yeah. You talk about R and B.
Like how you can make build houses
More cheaply?
faster.
Can. That's actually something that they do, but only in HDB market again. So that's a possibility for supply. Yeah, that's totally fine. That's actually a good example of what I mean by, as long as you have a supply factor, right, no one cares about what it is and whether it's really a big thing in recent times now. Because that's something the government has done a while back already. So nowadays, right, if you can observe how they construct houses, apartments, it's very interesting. They do it in a modular fashion. They prefabricate the floor and they literally just stack. Like they literally stack. So they will build like the rectangle and then they'll stack. And then they'll stack the houses. That's how they build it so quickly nowadays. So that's a real thing. That one can. No problem. Anything that lower cost of production, raise supply of housing, totally fine. My only problem is I don't know whether you can explain R&D or not. Land sales is much easier, right? It's raw materials, it's cost of production. You R&D, then how you explain? You got the example to say what the R&D is and what they do and how they cut costs and how it leads to more housing. Difficult, right? Yeah. So always pick, yes, you need a supply factor. What the example is, you better make sure you're comfortable with it. As long as you can articulate, it's generally fine. But that's a good question. Anything else? No? Okay, the last essay for today. Question 3. Government policies to restrict the use of cars and encourage the public to use the MRT continue to be a source of heated debate in Singapore. Assess the effectiveness of the policies available to the Singapore government in overcoming market failure in Singapore's land transport market. It's a very easy market failure question. Negative externalities, 3 policies, pros and cons. Okay? The only hard part is the policies that you use. Because you're constrained by what Singapore actually does. Right? So, ERP, public transport, I definitely need this too. ERP is like a tax. Public transport is the long-term solution. Now, public transport is not a standard negative externality solution. It's not. But because it's the public transport market, and it's the only long-run solution you can propose. Right? All the other markets that we learn, healthcare, education, we always have a combination of short and long-run solutions. So I need a long-run solution. That's why I need the public transport bit. Okay? So ERP, public transport. COE, honestly, I would say optional. You got these two, good enough. If you're not comfortable using COE, use education and campaign to discourage people to drive cars, encourage people to walk, to cycle, which is just not possible unless they start installing showers at every school and every office in Singapore. Otherwise, by the time you get there, you're so drenched, you rather go home. But education and campaign, definitely doable. Okay? Okay, let's dive in. Market failure arises when the free market fails to allocate resources to produce the right amount of goods and services most desired by society. That's the best way to define it. In the land transport market, market failure arises due to the presence of negative externalities associated with an excessive number of car trips. You can put vehicle trips as well, so it doesn't have to be cars. But we know that that's the main thing we're targeting. In Singapore, the government employs a range of policies to tackle this issue, including the use of electronic road pricing, ERP, a certificate of entitlement, COE scheme, and the development of a cheap and efficient public transport system. Negative externalities are spillover costs on third parties not directly involved in the production or consumption of a particular good or service. You gotta know your definitions by now. Market failure very technical. You're gonna be replicating and regurgitating 70% of the essay. The key is to contextualize. You need to tell me things like what are the externalities, what is the external cost, and you need to be very reliant on the examples. In the land transport market, the consumption of car trips generates negative externalities in the form of traffic congestion as well as air pollution, resulting in market failure. The impact of this can be seen in figure 1 below. Very standard diagram, right? The main thing is it has to be car trips or vehicle trips. You know why? You can't put cars. Because that becomes the market for cars. The market failure is not in the market for cars. It's in the market for when we utilize the cars and we drive, right? So car trips. Another thing about why it's important to contextualize the externalities is that when you talk about solutions, you do this implicitly, right? But when you do solutions and policies, you have this tendency to link to the cause, correct or not? When you want to evaluate whether the policy works or not, or whether it has limitations, or how big is the limitation, it always comes back to this, right? You need to look at the underlying cause. So later on, you'll see me reference some policies can solve pollution, some can only solve congestion, some can solve both. So that's why you need to contextualize. This massive chunk under the diagram, if you're still not comfortable with how to explain the 4 steps for externalities, this is how you do it. Okay? Under the free market, the consumers and producers of car trips will seek to maximize profits and utility, and this is achieved where MPB is equals to MPC. Thus, the free market will consume car trips up to Q market. From society's point of view, the optimal amount of car trips is where MSC is equals to MSB, where the last unit, this line is important, where the last unit of car trips consumed adds as much to society's benefit as it does to cost, maximizing society's welfare as measured by the sum of producers and consumer surplus. If you didn't know this by now, the welfare is measured by PS and CS, right? Which is why I always teach you, right? Why do I always teach you that the deadweight loss must point at the optimal? Because in a normal equilibrium, with this Q optimal, this is CS and DS, right? If you extend this line, this is supply equals to MC, right? This is D equals to MB. When your price is here and you are at any of the quantity to the right, your price is lower than your marginal cost, so it's a negative producer surplus. Right? Because producer surplus is a positive when the price is higher than your marginal cost, than the minimum that you need. You pay a price that's higher than your minimum that you're willing to, than the maximum you're willing to pay, which is MB, is a negative consumer surplus. So you're actually adding these two up to give you the deadweight loss. Then over here it's just cutting the CS and PS off. That's why it always points at Q optimal. So by now, if you still don't know where to shade, please remember your triangle head always points at the optimal equilibrium. Okay? Especially for this diagram, because it's very tempting to shade this triangle. This triangle just appears when you draw. So everyone will shade this. I used to shade this also. No one taught me this shortcut. Because the triangle is just there, you're like, oh, let's just shade that. It's wrong. You need to extend the line up, and then you shade it. Which is also why I always put my MEC here. Just to remind yourself, right, that you have to extend the line up. Okay, this is where allocative efficiency is achieved. However, due to the presence of negative externalities in the form of congestion and air pollution, MSC exists. I cannot emphasize this enough. Please don't tell me it shifts. It doesn't shift. It's just at a different level. MSC and MPC are separate concepts. They are related, but they're separate. Right? So it exists at a higher level. It's just like saying, oh, your cost is higher than mine. My cost doesn't shift to your cost. Your cost is higher than mine. Right? Exists at a higher level. The MEC manifests, this line is important, that's the contextualization, in the form of health issues for those who inhale polluted air and did not participate in consuming or producing car trips, and companies who face a loss in productivity and revenues from workers as a result of traffic congestion. This results in a divergence between Q market and Q optimal, where the market allocates resources towards the production of car trips, resulting in market failure and the deadweight loss as shown in the shaded area. Market failure arises since MSB is less than MSC at Q market. So MSC is here, MSB is there. Okay, so MSC exceeds MSB at Q market, deadweight loss. Okay, page 13. Yes.
The MEC is like the time loss. Because technically there's traffic on it, and then isn't it because people are stuck? That's why there's lower productivity instead of maintaining polluted air.
No lah, I mean both are valid. Like both are also external costs. So there's the pollution angle and there's also the congestion angle. So the time loss is for the congestion angle. But the reason why I focus on the companies, right, is because it's very grey when you say the driver who's driving time loss, right? Is it really an external cost? Because you're kind of contributing to the problem. So I choose to focus it on the companies. Because when you get stuck in a traffic jam, your company pays the price for you coming to work late. You see? So on the time, so again, just to clarify what I'm saying, there are two external costs, right? Pollution and congestion. So the congestion one, I choose to focus not on time loss of the driver because that's so grey, right? As to whether that's really a spillover cost or not. But instead, I choose to focus on the company. Because you are late for work, your company suffers as a result. And they did not participate in the driving. To address this market failure, the Singapore government has implemented the ERP system, which serves as a form of an indirect tax that raises the cost of consuming car trips. ERP gantries charge drivers the tax every time they drive through certain roads during certain peak hours of the day. The effect of the ERP can also be seen in figure 1. Figure 1 is very versatile, just 2 in 1. Just relabel MSC as MSC equals to MPC plus tax. And then you can use a diagram to help you explain. Assuming, this part's important, assuming the government is able to levy a tax that's equal to the MEC. You know why this is important? Because it doesn't mean that you tax, you will shift MPC to MSC. You know? That's an assumption. We are showing the ideal scenario, assuming your tax works 100%, which it won't, because you don't know what your MPC is. It's a best guess, right? This will cause the MPC curve to shift leftwards until it's equal to MSC, as shown by the MPC plus tax label. This is the result of a rise in cost of consuming car trips. This then raises the equilibrium price of car trips, which forces consumers of car trips to internalize the external costs and cutting back on their QD correspondingly. Ideally, this should be in the new Q market where MPB equals to MPC plus tax to be a Q optimal, the socially optimal level of output. It eliminates deadweight loss and resource allocative efficiency as MSB is now equals to MSC. Couple of things to note. You never eliminate the externality, you eliminate the deadweight loss. Okay? You look at this diagram, even if we are at Q optimal, right? Okay, so just now, earlier part what I said was, when you try to fix market failure, for the big three, what I call the big three is externalities, merit, demerit, profit. It's always a quantity problem. We literally don't care how we get there, we just want the quantity to be there. So a tax, a subsidy is what we call a market-based solution. We change incentives and people move there automatically. So Q market prime is now here. Because with the tax, this is your new MPC, this is still your MPB. So you will be, Q market will be at Q optimal, ideally. Now assuming that you are here, this is MEC, right? What is MEC? MEC is external cost per unit of output. Right? External cost per unit of output. It's the vertical distance, it's not an area. Okay? Which is why a lot of people like to ask me this question. When do you draw this? This is rising marginal external cost. The more quantity you have, an incrementally bigger problem. Is it relevant in congestion and pollution? Yes, you can, but there's no need to. It doesn't add a lot to your marks even if you have that. Right? Because a 10 car jam versus a 100 car jam, the 100 car traffic jam is more than 10 times as bad. That's the implication here. Okay? So if this is a vertical distance, right, that means this area is what? Correct? Cost per unit times quantity. So what does this tell you? You are not eliminating the externality. You are accepting that there's an optimal amount of externality you can live with. Which is why we still have traffic jams. We still have pollution. It's just not as bad as if we didn't have the ERP. Okay? However, the ERP has its limitations. Firstly, due to imperfect information on the part of the government, it could be impossible for them to estimate the exact MEC that is generated from the consumption of car trips. Setting the ERP rate too high or too low could result in over or under taxation. The former causing a dead weight loss as Q market falls below the Q optimal, while the latter fails to fully eliminate the original dead weight loss from the overconsumption. Neither outcome will be allocatively efficient. Secondly, ERP as an indirect tax is regressive. It costs lower income consumers a greater proportion of their income and thus worsens income redistributions. Right? All indirect taxes are regressive. The poorer you are, the bigger the percentage of your income it consumes. The ERP fundamentally discriminates against lower income groups as there is a disproportionately larger impact on their SOL as a result of the tax. Lastly, while ERP helps to ease congestion along certain roads during peak hours, it could actually result in congestions on other roads. Right? So it doesn't get rid of the congestion, it just moves it elsewhere. This is a contextual argument. It's not a standard tax argument that we bring in. But the first two are. The first two are super classic, super important tax arguments. Imperfect information, regressiveness. Okay, ERP will do little to alleviate the market failure associated with pollution, as it is unlikely to reduce total road usage, merely changing the time at which motorists choose to travel. Okay? Secondly, the government could use the COE system. Now, COE on itself, the market for COE is like that. Okay? So, they set the amount of COE available and then it's just free market determines the price. Now, the way COE tries to curb car trips is by curbing car ownership. The assumption is that if I can reduce the number of cars that people own, there's going to be less drivers on the road. Very logical. That's the principle. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to curb MPV, because MPV is your demand. We're trying to curb demand. Okay? So the government uses the COE system, a quota system, to reduce the demand for car trips by reducing car ownership. Consumers are forced to bid for a COE in order to buy a car, and there's a fixed number of COEs released by the government at any one moment in time, acting like a quota system. The COE thus restricts the number of cars that are owned in Singapore and is expected to reduce the demand for car trips correspondingly. This is expected to reduce the MPV. You need to reference the diagram, so MPV shift left. Ideally, the government will want MPV to fall until it cuts MPC, such that the new Q market is a Q optimal where allocative efficiency is achieved. So, let's very quickly okay, so what we're going to shift is this MPV prime. Always remember that when you shift, you never shift the MSC on it. Never shift the MSB. You always shift the private cost, private benefit. Okay, so this is what we mean. We want the new MPV to cut MPC at Q optimal, such that Q market prime is here. That's what we are describing over here. However, the COE might not be effective for a few reasons. The ability to reduce the demand of cars substantially is dependent on the number of COEs issued. Over the years, as Singapore's population and income grew, the demand for cars rose. Correspondingly, the government has allowed the number of COEs to climb gradually, although in a measured fashion, hence restricting the rate of car growth in Singapore. Since car ownership is allowed to rise, demand for car trips has actually risen in the time, which has most likely worsened the market failure as a result of increased congestion and pollution. However, we consider that the COE ultimately results in a net reduction in car trips. Means what? Means that although we put in the COE, we allow it to rise and more car trips, but it's still better than not having it at all. That means the failure is still less than what it could have been if it were totally uncontrolled. It probably still helps to reduce the allocative inefficiency and the market failure that exists. Secondly, the expensive COE, which could account for up to a third of vehicle prices, could perverse incentives
that instead lead to an increase in car trips, right? Whenever I tell this to people, they're like, yeah, that will be me. Because if you buy a car and you pay so much for it, even a 2-minute walk to NTUC or 7-Eleven, you will drive. Correct? So it's perverse incentive. Yeah, you reduce car ownership overall, but it could still lead to people driving more. Leads to more congestion, leads to more pollution. Okay, this will translate to consumers driving even if walking or other modes of transportations are viable for short journeys. This would also worsen rather than improve the market failure that exists. Lastly, the development of a cheap and convenient public transport system is also targeted at reducing the demand for car trips. So the ideal is still this diagram, right? But what we're trying to do is public transport market is like that. Right? Prices of interrelated goods. So this is the one that people might struggle with. They might shift the wrong thing. Okay? You increase supply of public transport either because you bring more MRT lines, run more bus routes, run more trains, run them more frequently, or you subsidize, both of which should lead to this happening. That's the ideal outcome. A cheap and convenient public transport system with subsidized fares encourages consumers to switch from consuming car trips to public transport. If it is substantially better than getting stuck in traffic or having to find and pay for parking. Offering public transport cheaply represents a reduction in the price of a substitute, which is a non-price determinant of demand. This is thus expected to translate into falling demand as represented by a leftward shift in the MPV curve. Similar to how the COE works, the ideal outcome will be for the new MPV to cut the MPC curve such that the new Q market is at Q optimal, again achieving allocative efficiency. Once again, such a policy has limitations. Firstly, developing a public transport system is extremely costly, even without considering the cost of subsidizing fares to make them more affordable. The government incurs an all cost in spending on transportation, which has to be weighed against other types of spending sacrifice. Very standard explanation, right? What cost again? Secondly, the policy is highly dependent on XEV, biggest argument that you have to make alongside cost. Because once you talk about this as a factor, then XEV comes into play. How close are they as substitutes? If I lower price here, how big of an impact on demand do I expect to see? If consumers perceive the two to be weak substitutes due to superior comfort and convenience of cars, then the XEV is likely to be positive and less than 1 in magnitude, which results in modest falls in demand even if public transport prices are cheap. This is perhaps why consumers continue buying cars despite the high ERP and COE costs, as the perceived convenience, comfort and prestige of car ownership have made public transport weak substitutes. Overall, the policies have proven effective in curbing the extent of market failure in Singapore's land transport market. Recently, it was reported, this is just a snippet for you to use, although I highly doubt they're going to test this anytime in the next 5 years. It was reported that the number of private car trips taken by Singapore has actually fallen for the first time since 1997. If you really think about it, right, does this really mean that it worked? It took 21 years, right, for it to fall. So while the policies might have taken some time to be effective, they have proven to be rather successful. This can also be seen by the reduced congestion on major roads during peak hours that has already manifested over the years. However, the government has also supplemented these policies with road widening works to accommodate a higher flow of vehicles, building more expressways and roads, as well as using education and campaigning to encourage consumers to switch to public transport. The continued development of the transport infrastructure has certainly also contributed to reducing the market failure. However, it is clear that for it to be eliminated, we need to improve the policies and the usual, you can say, merge short-run, long-run solutions, and so on. Okay, any questions?
Why do you only have two causes? Why do you only have one cause of market failure?
So what were your other causes?
So I have to think of something, right? Because I thought there's 3 causes.
So it's not always that you need more than one cause. It really depends on the general rule, I guess, is that if it's an accidental question, just one will suffice. If you have multi causes, it depends on it really depends on the market that they're asking you for, right? Because in this case, if you ask yourself what other causes of failure are there, what are the causes of failure? Imperfect information doesn't really work. If you go to the numeric group angle, your other thing will be imperfect information, which can't be, right? Yesterday's class is interesting. Someone brought up and said you can use market dominance. I think it's okay, but if you're going to use firms, I will use natural monopoly as an argument. Because the funny thing is, if you really want to be able to bring in examples, you must understand that our oligopolistic market structure is by construct. The government is the one determining how many operators can there be. Right? So you talk about market failure, you can talk about oligopoly, then what's the solution? Correct. You literally have no examples of what they can potentially do. So if you want to bring in market dominance, I would say natural monopoly could be a reasonable one. But here's the thing. Trains doesn't fall under land transport. Right? Land transport will be cars, buses, and taxis. Right? And buses, you cannot argue that buses cause market failure. They do not cause congestion because they carry so many more people in so much smaller space. So see, there's always nitty-gritty that doesn't really fit in very nicely. So negative externalities is like the main thing, and then just throwing three policies, and that's basically it. I know why you're asking this question, because sometimes you get a part A and part B, where part A is like a very good issue, and then you got three things, or a demerit good, then you have two things. But it's not always like that. You get what I mean? In fact, some mark schemes will tell you that even for those questions that's like a merit group, you only need two like really long explanations. When I ask for three, it's like being cancelled already. It's not a must. Then someone even better, if they say maybe talk about positive externalities in like public transport. I'm like, yeah, can, but then how to it's like too many failures and too many policies. Like how are you going to squeeze all of them into 25 marks? Right? So that would be my consideration. Shouldn't be an issue if you do just negative externalities and three policies pros and cons. That's not a hard and fast rule that there will be more than one cause of failure. If it were not negative, if it weren't externalities, I'll agree with you. Because externalities has a diagram, it's kind of like reversing up. Okay? Questions? If not, I'll talk you through the extra questions very quickly. That's on page 15. The most interesting question, if you ask me, for this three questions is 3B. Okay? 3B is the kind of silent killer. You see market failure, wow, damn happy. A so easy, B policies, and then you die because you ignore the word unintended consequences. Okay? So you always need to pay attention to these little things. It doesn't change the content. It's still three policies, pros and cons. But what point you use and how you explain it will be affected by that. So go and try and then give me my analysis, okay? That's the one interesting one. Question 2 is very standard. It's a super standard firm question. As long as you've done enough firm question, I think you can recognize what they're asking for. 1 is a very traditional, very classic demand and supply question that's hard. Don't need a lot of contextual knowledge because they give you the markets, but they didn't give you enough factors and they didn't give you the specific other markets to talk about. So the need to come out the markets yourself, come out the factors yourself could be a bit of a challenge. But not exceptionally hard, just kind of like what you expect for a regular demand supply question. So I think prior to 2016 or 2015, demand supply questions were always like that, 25 marks, and then they give you a couple of markets, a couple of factors, and you have to explain. Okay? Okay, that'll be all. Next week is going to be the same thing. I'll give you the remaining 3 2017 questions. If you can look at it in class, look at it beforehand, before you come to class, that'll be great. If not, I'll again give you 15 minutes to look at it. And then the last part, I'll just give you another 3 extra questions that you can look at. After that, we're actually taking a break. I'm not sure if you remember. We're going to break until the weekend of the 16th and 17th of November. I'm most likely I'm planning to start the extra intensive class midweek this week. Most likely Thursday. I'm going to send the Google Forms through. And then, again, I said it's optional. If you want to come, please come. I'll probably start with firms, since everyone likes firms. The next thing I'm thinking of doing will be BOP and exchange rate, because people don't like BOP and exchange rate. And then I'll figure out the rest of that. Okay? That's largely the plan. If not, that's all. I will see you all next week. Okay? Alright, thanks. have questions, please state. Anything?
Alright, that was the first question. But then you talked about the lack of labour, right? Is there any way we can talk by like how Singapore lacks natural resources?
Then my explanation is entirely the same.
How?
Okay, lack of natural resources. So it depends on what natural resource you want to use. That's why I use labour, because labour